Today we're going to tackle yeast. Now, I love yeast. I love making bread. I love all of that. And I understand that right now yeast might be a little hard to come by, but I had to throw this in there because if we're going to do pizza, and I did biscuit pizza dough as a recipe, we have to do traditional pizza dough too. This recipe is a flatbread pizza, so it is going to make 2 smaller flatbreads, but if you wanted to use this as a pizza dough recipe, you 100% could. It would just make 1 full pizza. It's a wonderful, wonderful recipe from Sally's Baking Addiction, and it's so good. It's kid approved. Yeah, and for those of you guys who are like, I've never worked with yeast before, yeast is really easy. There's just some simple rules we're gonna follow in order to make sure we don't kill it, okay? Because we want our yeast to stay alive. It's gonna grow and it's gonna feed and it's gonna just be so awesome, okay? So I will hold up my recipe. We're gonna get going. And again, if you're gonna do this flatbread, you don't necessarily have to make it into a pizza. You can put whatever toppings you want on it. If you've got like mozzarella and you've got tomatoes, you've got balsamic or anything like that, you can do more of a margarita style pizza. If you've got leftover roasted veggies, put that on with some pesto and some cheese. So good. Honestly, your options for this are limitless, okay? So do not feel that if you do not have any pizza sauce or anything to make pizza, that you can't do it. You totally can, but you absolutely do need yeast, all right? Super sorry, but it makes it rise, okay? So let's take a look at the recipe. So there are more steps to this one just because for yeast you have to allow it to proof, which means to grow bigger, and you have to allow it to rest as well, okay? So very first thing I'm gonna do though is I'm gonna wash my hands. And I do want to make sure my forearms are clear on this one because I will be dealing with dough, okay? And all my rings and everything else are off as well. All right, so I've got my yeast. Now, for this recipe, I will be using active yeast or quick rise yeast. Basically, it's instant yeast, okay? And that's the one I most often use for all of my baking, all of my bread, whatever I use. Because it works so fast and it's just awesome. All right, so I've got 5 milliliters of yeast in here. I am going to put it in one of my large bowls. I do need both of them out because I'll be transferring the other one. Once the dough has gotten, I'll be transferring the dough to the other one. And I will eventually need stuff like my rolling pin, but first off, I'm going to let this grow and rise. So I'm going to feed my yeast, okay? Now, when we have yeast, basically in order for it to grow, we need to provide it with food, which is going to be sugar. If you do not want to do white sugar with this recipe, you can 100% do honey, okay? It totally works with honey. You just need to provide some sort of sweet source for it to be able to be fed, okay? The other thing that we're going to allow it to grow with is warm water. Please, please, please make sure that it is warm. It is not boiling. It is not too hot, or else you will kill all your wonderful yeast, all right? The other thing you want to do is make sure that your yeast is actually sort of fresh. Now, I store my yeast in the freezer, and that allows me to then have yeast last much longer. What I do though is if I know that I'm baking with yeast or making stuff with yeast, I take it out so that it can kind of get to room temperature first before I start working with it, all right? But it lasts so much longer in the freezer, and I don't have to worry about it going bad, okay? So I've got my yeast in here. I am going to add sugar to this. So my recipe calls for 5 milliliters of white sugar, and again, that's what I'm going to be feeding my yeast with. And then I'm going to add in my water. So I'm going to take my liquid measure and then I'm going to go towards. I'm going to make sure that it's warm, it's not boiling. And I'm going to fill it up closer to 100. That's my goal. sorry, 200. Okay, so so again, level surface, eye level. I'm slightly above 200, so I'm just gonna drain a little bit of this out. And I should be slightly below my line of 200. And that should just be at about 180. Okay, so I'm gonna take my water, I'm gonna make sure it's warm. It is, it's perfect. And I'm gonna put all of it into this bowl. I'm gonna grab my whisk and I'm gonna give this a good whisk, just to make sure that my yeast is getting fed and it's mixing in with my sugar, okay? Now, what I'm gonna be looking for is I want to see my yeast rise up and start to grow, and it's almost gonna look like a spore, okay? It'll start to gather, right? And you'll see more and more of these. You also see some bubbling, okay? So that bubbling is basically a chemical reaction with all of this yeast getting fed and growing. And eventually, once you leave this for the full 5 minutes, you should be able to smell it. Now, yeast smells very yeasty, which is probably not gonna help you out, but it has a distinct smell to it once it starts to grow, okay? So thankfully for this flatbread, I do not need it to like double in size or anything by the end of this, okay? I don't need it to get huge. We're not using a lot of yeast for this recipe. But I do need to make sure that I am gonna let it proof, so I am gonna let it sit for the full 5 minutes at the very beginning in order for this yeast to really get going, okay? Now, some things kill yeast. So I said heat kills yeast. The other thing that can absolutely kill yeast is salt, but we do need salt in our recipes because you'll notice that there is salt listed, okay? Now, what salt does is it makes it so that yeast doesn't go all crazy, okay? So the recipe calls in this one for 5 milliliters of salt. And again, this isn't a dough that I want to overflow. It's not a bun, it's not a bread. It's not anything that I need it to double or triple in size, okay? So eventually I am gonna be adding salt to this, and that's just gonna keep my yeast in check, right? So I'm actually gonna get you to come over here to take a look at what's happening with my yeast. And it's growing and it's feeding. So even while I was talking to you guys, look at that. And that's basically a huge, amazing sign that my yeast is good to go, that it's fresh, and it's still bubbling in the center, which is what I want. So I'm gonna give it about 2 more minutes. In the meantime, I'm gonna get together some of my other ingredients that I will be adding. Okay, so for traditional pizza, we always usually add olive oil to our recipes, and then of course salt and flour. All right, now if you wanted to make this a little bit more, I would say like fancy, you can add in other seasonings to your pizza dough. Italian seasoning works really well. You could add in some garlic powder. You can really, I mean, again, keep it to about 2 seasonings, I would, and make sure that they're within the same family. So you could do like rosemary and thyme, you can do oregano and sage if you wanted. And it's a really good way to even make your pizza dough just that little bit more, okay? All right, so to this recipe, I will be adding 15 milliliters of olive oil, and I cannot measure it in my glass measure. So I'm going to take my 15 milliliters and I'm going to measure it in. And I'm going to add it to my beautiful yeast. So I'm going to put it over top of my little bowl here. And I'm just going to put that in. And to that, I am going to add my salt. So if you are not used to a lot of salt, you can definitely put this a little bit less. I love salt in my pizza, and especially in my pizza dough. So I am gonna do the full amount, okay? And that's gonna cut some of the sugar. So as soon as I put the salt in, I'm gonna probably see a little bit of a reaction with my yeast. So once I've got that in, what I'm gonna do is just whisk it gently. Now I don't wanna over mix it, okay? But I am gonna whisk it gently just to make sure it's all mixing together. I am then going to start to add my flour. Now, in the recipe, it says 500 milliliters or less. okay? And the reason why it says that is because I'm basically gonna add enough flour for me to create a sticky dough, okay? And it might not need all the 500, so don't just dump this and be like, done, okay? I wanna make sure that it's the right consistency so I don't have to add any other liquid. If you do end up adding way too much flour, you can always add more water. Just make sure that it's warm, okay? So I am going to start off just with half of this. And I'm going to take my utility fork and I'm going to start mixing. Now, of course, this is way too liquidy, so I'm going to keep on going. But I'm only going to add at about 125 milliliters at a time. And I can smell it starting to get good and yeasty. And again, this is too liquidy, but it's starting to pull away from the sides, which is what I want. So again, I'm gonna get my 500 or my 250. I'm only gonna do half of this. I'm just gonna sprinkle in a small amount and let's see how this goes. All right, my dough is starting to form. It's starting to fully pull away from my sides. So I'm gonna start working this with my hands. Now, before I start to do this, I am going to get my hands floured down so I don't lose half of my dough in this process. So I'm just gonna pour a little bit in this and I'm gonna start to work this dough. So it should be nice and light and stretchy. And if I find that it's sticking too much to my hands, I wanna make sure that I've got a little bit more flour in there. And in my bowl, I can actually start to knead this. So I've got some patches that are really, really sticky. So you see that there's a change in color there. So it's pretty shiny. So I'm gonna add a little bit more flour. And again, I'm at about 375 at this point. Okay, so I've still got about 125 left in there. And I think I'm almost good to go. I just have a little bit more flour. And I'm gonna start kneading it in this bowl. So again, fold, press, turn, fold, press, turn. And this just saves me from having to wipe down a countertop. If you cannot manage to do this in the bowl, definitely lightly flour your surface, transfer it over, and again, when you're kneading, you're folding, you're stretching your quarter turn. But right now, I've got a pretty good consistency, and I do not want to over knead, but I've got some flat, got amazing dough right now, and look how flexible it is, okay? It's got good weight to it, feels awesome. And again, I didn't transfer half of the dough to my fingers. I'm still good to go and I can peel some of it off. But I am gonna save my flour because I can use it to lightly flour my surface when I do need to roll this out. So we need to let this rest and rise. So in order to do that, here is what I am going to do. I'm gonna take my second bowl and I'm gonna take my spray. I'm using olive oil spray that I have, but you guys can always use cooking spray that you've got, like vegetable oil. You just want to make sure that you liberally spray down your bowl. Now, if you do not have spray, you can always take actual olive oil, put like 5 milliliters in it, and then just rinse it around. Basically, you're just going to press it around to make sure that the dough does not get stuck, okay? So you want this dough to rise. And if it gets stuck on the sides of your bowl, it won't rise properly. You want it basically greased down so it has the ability to move and to expand. Okay, so I'm going to take my dough, I'm going to put it in, I'm just going to make sure that it is good, and I'm actually going to spray it down with my spray, again, to make sure that it's all good, so that it has that flexibility, that grease to be able to climb if I need to. Now, I am going to leave this to rest for about 45 minutes, and I've got an option. I can put this in a warm place with a towel over top. Do not bake it, don't put it in your oven, okay? So typically what I do is I just put it on my stovetop, okay? If I would like this to kind of proof a little bit faster than the 45 minutes, there's another hack I can do. So I can actually put it into my microwave. Don't turn your microwave on, okay? We are not turning the microwave on. And I can get a coffee cup with boiling water and I can put it into my microwave. and I can let it sit for about 30 minutes. And it should proof and kind of capture the steam and the heat in there and proof a little bit or rest a little bit faster and expand, okay? But again, we are not microwaving, okay? So at any point in this time, if you're turning on your oven and putting it in or putting it in your microwave and turning it on, do not do that, okay? It's not gonna speed up the process. You're gonna end up killing your yeast and it's just not gonna work out, okay? So I'm gonna let this rest. I'll see you in a little bit.